All right, good morning, everyone. This week's Parsha is Nitzavim Vayelech as we inch closer and closer to the end of the Torah. Nitzavim can be found on page 1115 in the Steinsaltz Chumash and page 1086 in the Art Scroll Chumash. Now, Parshas Nitzavim is best understood in context. Clearly, every parsha, every pasuk, has an important context. But when it comes to Parshas Nitzavim, I believe it's especially so. And the reason for that is as follows. I need to set the stage a little bit before we dive into Nitzavim itself. So we're going to be turning some pages at the beginning of this class, and then we'll settle into Parshas Nitzavim. Turn back with me for a moment to Parshas Kisavo. In Parshas Kisavo, we have the tochacha, the rebuke, the blessings and the curses that are articulated as part of the bris, part of the covenant that Hashem makes with the Jewish people. So if you take a look on page 1101 in the Steinsaltz and page 1072 in the Art Scroll, Perek Chav Zayin Pasuk Aleph 27:1, Vayitzav Moshe esam bayom hahu lemor elu yamdu levarech esam al har grizim ba'avrachem es hayarden. Right, these are the ones who are going to stand on Har Gerizim. In the next pasuk, it says who's going to stand on Har Eval in order to do that whole ceremony to pronounce the blessings and the curses. And then if you look further, you get to some arurs, right? Cursed arur ha'ish asher yaseh. Right, these are part of these are the curses that are pronounced. And if you turn the page to Perek Chav Ches, chapter 28, verse 1, Chav Ches Aleph, V'haya im shamoa tishma b'kol Hashem Elokecha. This is what will be if you listen to Hashem. And there's a listing, a beautiful listing of the many brachos that are in store for those who follow the Torah. If you turn the page again, I'm now on page 1076 in the Art Scroll, 1105 in the Steinsaltz, in Pasuk Tesvav, in verse 15, V'haya im lo sishma b'kol Hashem Elokecha. This is what will happen if you do not follow the Torah, do not listen to the voice of Hashem, lishmor, la'asos, es kol mitzosav v'chu kosav, asher nochi mitzavecha hayom. To keep all of the mitzvos and the chukim and so on and so forth that are being commanded today. And then there is a very long listing of curses, of punishments. It's difficult to listen to, which is why they are laned in an undertone, because there are just so many, and they are so harsh and severe, and there are many, many more psukim of punishments for not following the Torah than there are psukim of rewards for following the Torah, and that's a separate matter, which I'm not going to get into. But if you turn several pages, it goes on and on. Hashem will rejoice in punishing you, right? It says at one point. Just like Hashem will take joy in rewarding you, Hashem will take joy in punishing you. And there will be exile, and there will be destruction, and all the terrible things you could think of are found here in the listing of all the punishments. The listing of the punishments concludes on page 1113 in the Steinsaltz and page 1084 in the Art Scroll. The very end of Perek Chav Ches, Pasuk Samech Tes. Right, if you look at Pasuk Samech Ches, Pasuk 68, so that's the last of the punishments. That's the last harsh thing. Hashem is going to send you back to Mitzrayim in boats, to the place where Hashem told you not to go anymore. And you will be sold, or you will sell yourselves. You will sell yourselves there to your enemies as slaves and maidservants, and there won't even be a buyer. How much more pathetic can that be? It's one thing to be sold into slavery. It's another thing to sell yourself into slavery. it's a whole other thing to try to sell yourself into slavery. Nobody even wants you. So verse 68 is the very last of the punishments. And then Samech Tes, the very next pasuk is Ela Divrei Habris. These are the words of the covenant. Asher tzivah Hashem es Moshe lichros es bnei Yisrael be'eretz Moav. Milvad habris asher karasi tam b'chorev. Aside from the bris that was made at Chorev at Har Sinai. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting the ending of the curses is because I'd like to contrast it for a moment with the first time the blessings and the curses were explained by Moshe, were given over by Moshe. And that, of course, is in Parshas Vikkhu Kosai. So hold on to the page where we are now and turn to Parshas Vikkhu Kosai. And I will give you the page number. Page 715 in the Steinsaltz, and in the art scroll, it is page 714. This is the very conclusion of the curses. 714 in the art scroll, 715 in the Steinsaltz, and you have the same v'haya im shamoa, right? If you listen to the Torah, then Hashem will have these rewards. V'im lo sishma'u, right? I should say im b'chu kosai telechu. If you walk in the ways of the Torah, these are the rewards. And then it says v'im lo sishma'u, if you don't listen to me, these are the punishments. Definitely not as long as Parshas Kisavo, but look how it concludes. Let's start with pasuk Lamed Ches 38. Vavadtem ba'goyim ve'achla eschem eretz oivechem. Right. So, you're after being chased off your land, you will be you will perish among the nations. The land of your enemies will consume you. V'hanisharim bachem yimaku ba'avonam be'artzos oivechem. Vavonos avosam itam yimaku. The survivors among you shall molder in their iniquity in the lands of your enemies, and also in the iniquities of their fathers. With them they shall molder. Vadu es avonam ves avon avosam, and they shall confess their sin and the sins of their fathers. And how they walked recalcitrantly with me. Af ani elech, I too Hashem will walk amongst them, imam bekeri, right? With a certain sense of stubbornness and recalcitrance, as Rabbi Steinsaltz defines it. I will bring them to the land of their enemies, or perhaps then their sealed hearts will be humbled. So that is the basically the conclusion of the punishments. And then it says, V'zacharti es brisi Yaakov. Then Hashem says, I will remember the covenant with Yaakov, v'af es brisi Yitzchak, the covenant with Yitzchak, v'af es brisi Avraham et Skor, v'aretz es Kor. And I will remember them, I will remember my covenant, I will remember the land. V'aretz te'azev mihem v'siretz ha'shav sosev, ha'sham mihem v'him yirtzu es avonam, yanov v'shotayim ha'asu v'eschu kosai gala nafsham. The land shall be forsaken of them, shall be repaid for her Sabbaths and its desolation from them. They shall repay their iniquity because they rejected the Torah. Va'af gamzos. And even so, despite all this, biosam be'eretz oivehem lo ma'astim v'lo galti l'chalosom la'afer brisi itam. I won't reject them, I won't detest them to the extent that I will break my covenant with them. Ki ani Hashem Elohim, because I am Hashem their God. V'zacharti lehem bris rishonim. And I will remember the covenant of their forebears. And I will remember the covenant, when I took them out of Mitzrayim in front of all the nations. And this is the Torah. This is the covenant that Hashem makes with the Jewish people through Moshe. And so what I'd like to highlight here is how the conclusion of the Tochacha in Vikkhu Kosai is very different than the conclusion of the Tochacha in Parshas Kisavo, last week's Parsha, because we saw how in Kisavo, in the Tochacha of Devarim, the punishments are listed, and then it just says very plainly, Eila Divrei Habris, this is the words of the covenant. There are no words of hope or consolation at the end of the Tochacha, at the end of the punishments, like you do find in Vikkhu Kosai. In the Tochacha, which lists many terrible punishments, it concludes, though, V'zacharti es brisi, that Hashem will remember the covenant. Hashem will remember the covenant. In Devarim, Eila Divrei Habris. These are the words of the bris. In Vayikra, in Vikkhu Kosai, though, it says Hashem will not forget us. Hashem will not abandon us. That even if we suffer all of these punishments that are listed here in the Tochacha, Hashem will have, so it doesn't use the word mercy, but Hashem will have some element of mercy for us. So you have that in Vayikra, but you don't have that in Devarim that we just read last week. Why not? Why not? Why is it that the punishments in Vayikra end with a message of hope, of consolation, that Hashem still feels this deep connection with the Jewish people based on the covenants that He made with their forefathers, and yet in Devarim, nothing, no mention. Eila Divrei Habris, very cold, very legalistic, very technical. Right? We always talk about the contrast between din and rachamim, strict justice versus mercy. So all those punishments listed in the Tochacha, that represents din, that represents judgment, that represents justice. Hashem told us what will happen if we violate the Torah, and this is what will happen, right? Reward and punishment. I shouldn't say reward and punishment, right? Crime and punishment, right? You do the crime, you do the time. But in Sefer Vayikra, after that message comes a message of consolation. But here in Parshas Kisavo, in last week's Parsha, it's crime and punishment, period. Eila Divrei Habris. So that's the context in which Parshas Nitzavim arrives. That here we ended last week's Parsha with this strict sense of justice, Eila Divrei Habris, no message of rachamim, of mercy, of consolation. And yet, we'll see now that Parshas Nitzavim comes to round out that picture. If you read Parshas Nitzavim with that harsh tone of Parshas Kisavo in mind, then you can really sense, you can really feel the contrast and understand the deeper significance of Parshas Nitzavim. So let's go back now to Parshas Nitzavim in our Chumashim, page 1115 in the Steinsaltz, page 1086 in the Art Scroll. And what do we find? Atem Nitzavim Hayom. You are all standing here today, Kulchem Lifnei Hashem Elokechem, before Hashem your God, Roshechem, Shiftechem, Ziknechem, V'Shotrechem, Kol Ish Yisrael, Tapchem, Deshechem, V'Gercha, Shir B'Kerav Machanecha, Mechotei Beitzech Ad Shoev Meimecha. Everyone's here. A very poetic rendering describing all the different kinds of people that are standing here today. Le'avrecha bivris Hashem Elokecha uva'alaso. Le'avrecha, to pass you into the bris that Hashem is making with you, and the oath or the curse, however you want to define that Hashem is, right? L'man hakim oscha hayom lo le'am. Right? In order to establish you today as a people. V'hu yelech Elokim, and He will be your God. Kasher diberlach, as He spoke to you, v'chasher nishma lavosecha, and like He promised your forefathers, l'Avram, l'Yitzchak, l'Yaakov. And then it says v'lo itchem levadchem, which we're gonna. Well, I was gonna skip it, but now I realize I want to go through. Right? V'lo itchem levadchem, anochi krisis v'yisod v'asal ozos. Not only you are we making this covenant. Everyone, those who are standing here today and those who are not here today, right? The Jewish people throughout all time. Because you know very well that we were in Egypt, and the different nations that we passed through. And we saw all of their terrible, detestable avodah zarah. Lest you have some people among you who are going to stray after those things. Guess what? Right? And it will be that upon hearing the words of this curse, he will bless himself in his heart, saying, peace will be with me. I will follow the desire of my heart. I will do whatever I want. Right? They're talking about people who aren't necessarily standing here physically today, but these are part of the covenant. Right? And Hashem will not have mercy on him. Lo yuveh Hashem sloach lo, ki az yashanaf Hashem. Right? Hashem will get angry. And so we seem to be returning to the harshness of the punishments. But watch what happens here. Watch what happens here. Because it says further, right? I'm in Pasuk Chaf now, verse 20. Right? Hashem will separate a person who goes off and worships avodah zarah. Hashem will separate them out, in accordance with all the curses and punishments that we just talked about. Right? The latter generation, your children will rise after you, and the foreigner will come from a distant land. They will see the afflictions of that land and the illnesses with which Hashem has blighted it, and they will say, right? They'll notice all the terrible things that will happen to the land as punishments. I'm now just paraphrasing. And all the nations will say, for what did Hashem do this to this land? Why did Hashem get so angry? And they'll know that it's because the Jewish people violated the bris. They aroused Hashem's anger to bring out all the punishments that we just listed. And for that reason, they will be removed from the land. And now look at Pasuk Lamed. Now turn to Pasuk Lamed, verse 30, chapter 30, verse 1. Perek Lamed, I should say. Perek Lamed, Pasuk Aleph. When all of this comes upon you, you will take it to heart, right? You shall put it in your heart when you are among all the nations that Hashem has banished you to. And you will return to Hashem your God, and you will listen to his voice. Right? Like all that I command you, you and your children, with all your heart and all your soul. And Hashem will return your remnant. He will gather you, and he will have mercy on you. And here is the tone of hope and mercy that we found in Parshas Vikkhu Kosai, that we did not find in Parshas Kisavo. It's here in Parshas Nitzavim. We always talk about how Nitzavim and Vayelech go together. Nitzavim means to stand in place. Vayelech means to move. There's a contrast. But the important contrast to note is between Parshas Kisavo and Parshas Nitzavim, because they have very similar messages. They both talk about the bris that Hashem is making with this generation. And they both talk about the consequences of violating that bris. But whereas Parshas Kisavo has a tone of strict justice and nothing else, right? These are the punishments, Eila Divrei Habris. This Parsha, Parshas Nitzavim, casts it in a more hopeful, positive light. Hashem assures us that we will do tshuva. V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha. You will return to Hashem. V'shamata b'kolo. You will listen. right? In Parshas Vikkhu Kosai and Parshas Kisavo, it was if you will listen to the voice of Hashem, if you will not listen to the voice of Hashem, right? If, right? Maybe this, maybe that, right? Should these things occur, here's a promise. Here's a guarantee. V'shamata b'kolo. V'shav Hashem Elokecha shevuscha, it says in Pasuk Gimel. Pasuk Daled, Im yihiene dachacha b'ktzei hashamayim, misham yikavescha Hashem Elokecha, misham yikachecha. No matter where you are, no matter where you're dispersed to, Hashem will bring you back. Umal Hashem Elokecha es levavcha. Hashem will circumcise your heart. Right? Again, in last week's Parsha, I know I'm getting a little repetitive here, but in last week's Parsha, Hashem promises punishments. Hashem will mete out punishments. It's your responsibility. You violated the Torah, you're responsible. Here in Parshas Nitzavim, it's a very different tone. Hashem will take the initiative to circumcise our hearts, to return us from the exile. And so there's a dual message here. There's a dual message. We're supposed to take Parshas Kisavo and Parshas Nitzavim together and recognize that both will happen to us. There will be a strict sense of justice. We will be punished. And nothing will undo, not nothing will undo, but nothing can prevent those punishments from happening if we violate the Torah. And at the same time, Hashem is also not just a God of din, Hashem is a God of rachamim. And that together with all that harsh stuff, Hashem will also have mercy upon us. Hashem guarantees, Hashem knows that we will do tshuva. Hashem has faith in us as much as we have faith in Him. You know, there's a Gemara that talks about how a teacher, the way a teacher relates to a student, right? Yamin dochef ubismol mikareves. I might be getting in that reverse, right? That a teacher is supposed to push away or rebuke with one hand, but draw the student closer with the other hand. That there's supposed to be a complex relationship where there is a certain element of accountability, and there's a certain sense of nurturing. And that's the image that we're given. That's the complete picture that we're given in our relationship with Hashem when we look at Parshas Kisavo and Nitzavim together. That Hashem, institutes accountability into our spiritual lives. We are accountable for our actions, and at the same time, Hashem is nurturing. Hashem has hope and faith and comfort for us, and assuring us that there will come a time after we've endured terrible punishments, there will come a time when He will gather us in, and not only will He do, but He will ensure that we do. Right? Hashem will circumcise our hearts. Hashem guarantees that we will do tshuva. Which to me, when I think about the messages of the Nevi'im, right? The Nevi'im read the Torah just as much as we did, right? The Nevi'im weren't, it's not like the Nevi'im were like, okay, I'm Yeshaya Hanavi, I got to write my own book in Tanakh, Yeshaya. No, Yeshaya also read the Torah. And so in all the messages of the Nevi'im, of Yeshaya and others, they convey both of these elements as well. Right? There are terrible prophecies of rebuke found in the Navi Yeshaya, and there are prophecies of comfort in the Navi Yeshaya. Right? We're still in the cycle of the Shiva Dinechemta, the 7 haftaros of consolation. Those haftaros, those messages of consolation are not just prophecies from Hashem, divinely inspired messages. They are also reflections of exactly what we find in the Torah reading, in Chumash. And that's the balanced message that we get when we take Parshas Kisavo and Nitzavim together. It's like din and rachamim. It's the complex picture. It's the full picture of our relationship with Hashem, the harsh and the soft. That's what we're given here in Parshas Nitzavim. But what's interesting to me is that these messages this complex message is given within the framework of a word that I've read a couple times already this morning, but did not focus on, and that is the word hayom. If you go back to the beginning of Parshas Nitzavim, 1115 in the Steinsaltz, 1086 in the Art Scroll, so you see, Atem Nitzavim Hayom, right? You are standing here today, Kulchem, all of you, L'fnei Hashem Elokeichem. This word Hayom is repeated a number of times throughout this parsha, and in fact, if you look carefully, you find that Moshe's entire speech of Sefer Devarim is punctuated with this word Hayom, today, because we know that Sefer Devarim, as I've mentioned on many occasions, Sefer Devarim basically represents one long speech, or maybe several speeches all by the same person. And that speech begins all the way back in the beginning of Sefer Devarim. And in the beginning of that speech in Sefer Devarim, Moshe says several important psukim, and he inserts the word Hayom, right? It says in Perek Dal, you don't have to turn there, but in chapter 4, at the beginning of Sefer Devarim, Umi goy gadol asher lo chulchu mishpatim tzadikim v'chol Torah hazos asher anochi nosein lifnechem hayom. Right? Moshe, in introducing the Maimed Har Sinai and reviewing it with this second generation, uses the word hayom. Right? When he talks about here we are. Right, when he actually begins when he begins the speech that will take him to the end of Sefer Devarim, in the beginning of chapter 5, Moshe calls to the Jewish people, says, "Shema Yisrael esachukim v'esamishvatim asher nochin dover be'osnechem hayom." Listen to all the mitzvos that I'm commanding you today. Right, that Moshe emphasizes that the speech that he's giving is framed by hayom. It's a speech that is being given today. And in the next pasuk, Lo asavosenu karas Hashem es abris hazos ki tanu anachu ela po hayom kulanu chayim. Right? Not just with our forefathers did Hashem make this covenant, but with us standing here today. Ki tanu anachu ela po hayom kulanu chayim. And it's that pasuk, which again I know we didn't turn to, but it's that pasuk in which Moshe begins his speech and says that Hashem is giving you this Torah today. It's that pasuk which connects, which basically is repeated. The spirit of that pasuk is repeated in the beginning of our parsha. Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem. So you can basically say that the entire speech of Moshe, the entire reviewing of the Torah, the entire reviewing of the bris, of the covenant, is framed by the word Hayom. Moshe says at the beginning of Perek Hey, chapter 5, and he uses it again several times here in chapter 29 at the end of his speech. Hayom. Now, what's the meaning? What's the significance of Hayom? But let me just show you a few more examples before we dive into that. So Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem, right? And then in pasuk 11, just skip one pasuk Yed Aleph, Avracha bivris Hashem Elokecha v'laso Asher Hashem Elokecha k'reisimcha Hayom, right? To pass you into this covenant today. Laman akimoscha Hayom, pasuk Yed Beis, in order to establish you today, right? Into this bris. And just the last example, even though there are several, but the last one I just want to cite for now is Pasuk Yudalid, verse 14. Hayom. That's exactly what Moshe said at the beginning of the speech, right? That this covenant's being made with those who are here and those who are not here. So why is this important message framed with the word Hayom? What's the significance of the word Hayom in Moshe's message? Now, you may think, like, this isn't such an important question. This isn't such a major question, because after all, Moshe Rabbeinu is at the end of his life. He's preparing this generation to enter into the land of Israel. and he is, he's identifying the significance of the transition that's happening. I spoke about this last week, right? That there's a transition that's happening, and that whatever bris, whatever covenant was made at Har Sinai is still as relevant, hayom today as it was, the day it was given, right? If he's re-articulating a bris, a covenant, which is supposed to be relevant every single day, so it makes sense to use the word hayom. Now that's definitely true, but I think there's a deeper there's something deeper going on here with the use of the word hayom, because Moshe says that even though we're talking today, it includes people who aren't necessarily here today, right? That I'm making this, we're making this covenant hayom today for those who are here, right? Es asher yeshno po imanu omed hayom, ves asher inenu po imanu hayom, right? There are people who are here today, and there are people who are not here today. And using the word hayom, I think what Moshe is trying to do is to create a bridge between the past, the present, and the future. And what I mean by that is when Moshe began Sefer Devarim using the word hayom, it was to emphasize that this generation did not stand as adults at Har Sinai. Right? This is 40 years after Har Sinai. And so the people who stood at Har Sinai, most of them are gone. And so the today of the beginning of Sefer Devarim, which is at the end of the 40 years, that today is being linked to Har Sinai 40 years before. That what happened 40 years before at the giving of the Torah is being reiterated hayom today at the beginning of Sefer Devarim. And the end of Sefer Devarim, after Moshe finishes reviewing the Torah or giving his meditations on the Torah, we talked about whether it's really a review or not, but now that Moshe has completed his messages, he has a new hayom. And that hayom is that the present connects to the future. So the hayom of the beginning of Sefer Devarim is connecting the past to the present, and the hayom of the end of Sefer Devarim, of Parshas Nitzavim, is connecting the present to the future. That whoever's standing here today represents not just themselves, it represents all those who come in the future. And so the fact that this is framed by hayom is to recognize that what Moshe is doing on this day is meant to create a connection in time, that the bris, the covenant, is as relevant to the people hearing it as it is to the people who are yet to hear it. And so this hayom is a hayom that transcends time, right? He's speaking to them on a particular day, a particular hayom, but that it's meant to convey a sense that every single day that will come, the people who are in those future days will be as connected to these words, to this bris, as the people who are physically there. And so hayom is meant to plant a stake in the ground, plant a moment, to identify a moment in time, which people should connect to whether they're alive at that moment or not. That this moment in time, even us talking here today, connect to that moment in time in which Moshe expressed the bris, expressed the covenant with the Jewish people. And this is what, and so when we think about, what the idea we expressed at the beginning of the class, namely the sense of hope, the sense of confidence that Hashem has in the Jewish people, that they will return, that after suffering all the punishments, because of divine justice, that they will ultimately return, that Hashem will circumcise the heart of the Jewish people. So to me, the fact that Hashem has such such faith in the Jewish people and such hope and such a sense of rachamim, of mercy, that no matter what we do, Hashem will ultimately return us, will ultimately have compassion on us, is another forward-looking concept, right? It's the hayom, right? That Moshe is speaking to the Jewish people at that point, at the end of the 40 years before he takes his leave, to the generation that is going to go into the land of Moab. The fact that he's telling them on that day that there will come a time in the future in which Hashem will have mercy upon the Jewish people is a further indication of the timelessness of his message. This framing these comments with Hayom and speaking about the future is such a powerful message to that generation and to us who read it as well. That Moshe could say Hayom to this generation, right? Say, I'm talking to you, Hayom, knowing that there will come a time when all of those terrible things will happen to the Jewish people, and yet even after all that, Hashem will return them and Hashem will circumcise their hearts. It shows you the timelessness of this Hayom that Moshe expresses. That again, there's this moment in time. This moment in time that Moshe is speaking to this people, but that moment has such a timeless message and speaks so much to the future, that this Hayom is meant to connect to everything that's going to go on in the future, that all the terrible things that we will inevitably suffer will also have an end. There will also come a time in which Hashem will say enough. And Hashem will return us. Hashem will circumcise our heart. And so the fact that the Parsha would use the word Hayom over and over again, and yet speak so much to the future, I think is extremely, extremely powerful. It sets a tone. When I read this psukim, it sets a tone of a realistic hope, of something that you can really truly believe in. That Hashem would speak to that generation, that Moshe would speak to that generation and declare Hayom, and yet speak so much about the future, shows such a degree of faith and confidence in Hashem's message and in the Jewish people. As you go through Parshas Nitzavim Vayelech over the week or over Shabbos, read it through this lens. Read it through this lens of a parsha that's meant to set the tone, not just for the immediate future of those people who were listening to it at that time, but it's speaking just as much to us who are actually living in this future. If you read these parshios through that lens, you'll see the beauty and the complexity of these messages. All right, thank you all so much for joining me today. Have a great week. We're going to be off next week. I'm not able to give the Parsha class next week, so I wish all of you a ksiva v'chasima tova, and stay tuned for the future, for the schedule going forward after next week. All right, take care, everybody. Have a great day.